Everybody's rolling in. We'll actually get started with the webinar. Let me just introduce myself very briefly. My name is Sixiang Wang. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures here at UCLA, and I teach primarily pre-modern Korean history. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second webinar in the Games in Korean History series, hosted by the UCLA Center for Korean Studies. This webinar series brings together game creators, history teachers, and scholars, and the gaming community through discussions over Korean history and its simulation. It views gaming, whether as classroom simulations, board games, or digital media, as a form of historiography in its own right. Rather than approach history in games merely as content, it considers the questions of position taking, simulation, agency, and representation in games as powerful ways of engaging with Korea's past. I'd also like to say a little bit about the Center for Korean Studies here at UCLA. It was established in 1993 to coordinate the development of UCLA's burgeoning programs in this field of research. And the center presides over the biggest Korean studies program on the mainland of the United States, with the most specialists dedicated to Korea on its faculty and the largest number of students studying Korean subjects at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Our event today is also sponsored by the Chosun History Society, a public learned society fostering the study, research, and teaching of Korea's past by connecting scholars working both outside and inside the professional academy. The Chosun History Society is a community based on sharing rather than competition or exclusivity, and it looks to provide opportunities for scholars who are operating independently or are otherwise under-resourced to share their research and generate interest into their work. And finally, I want to introduce our guests today. Today, we are joined by creators from the Growing Seeds Corporation, who are here as panelists for a discussion about one of their projects called Pechka, and created by MazM Studio. And the game's creators, as we'll see, will discuss the game's creative inspiration, the research process behind the game, and the significance of the choices the players make in the game. A little bit about the parent company, Growing Seeds Corporation, Chara는 Shia. It's a studio that creates story games based on classical literature and history under the MazM brand. Since 2016, they have created fandom by making games with various classical literature, such as The Wizard of Oz, Jekyll and Hyde, and The Phantom of Opera. So not just Korean history. But in 2020, Korea's painful early 20th century was depicted in a story game released as Pechka. And MazM from now on hopes to impress and empathize with the younger generation by creating story games based on literature and history, the cultural assets of mankind. So joining us from the Pechka team, we have Hyo-taek Kim, who is a founder and CEO of Growing Seeds. And we have Ji-young Kim, a game designer and scenario writer for Pechka. We also have Ji-soo Song, who is a scenario writer for Pechka. Yeon-jae Kim, who was an expert who supported the Pechka scenario writing, and he also holds an MFA from Korean Academy of the Film of Arts in Seoul. They are joined by Dr. Hee-jin Lee, who is a Pony Chung Fellow and Research Professor at Korea University in Seoul. She's a scholar of Korean literature and culture, and helping facilitate today's conversation is Yerim Kim, who from UCLA, one of our PhD students in modern Korean history. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Pechka team.
Okay. Hello, I'm Hyo-taek Kim from MazM team. I'll introduce. I'm very happy to introduce our team to you, and we'll introduce my game Pechka first by presentation. Okay, just a little bit. Okay, can you see the file? Okay. Hello, I'm Hyo-taek Kim, and CEO and a founder of Growing Seeds. I'm very happy to introduce my game Pechka in this seminar. And it is great honor to invite MazM team to this seminar also. I have to say thank you, Professor Wang and the other team members. Firstly, I'll introduce the Pechka for 10 to 15 minutes with presentation file. I'm Korean, so I'm not good at English very well. Please be generous on that. Okay, let's start about that. Okay, we are called MazM, our brand name. It's a little bit not familiar to you, but it's 2M is looks like a book, and from A to Z, it means all about the stories. And in Korean, meaning is the fruiting something, and MazM is a fruit something. Okay, we hope to be a best influential story game creator. The MazM is a storytelling game series. MazM is a story game series based on literature and history, and we have made 7 games until now. And the first one was a Yellow Bricks, which was based on the Wizard of Oz, and the second one was Jekyll and Hyde, which is from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You know. It hit 4.5 million downloads in mobile. And the third one, The Phantom of the Opera, is based on the French novel, The Phantom of the Opera. It hits 1 million downloads in mobile. And then we launched the Thy Creature in Steam. It's based on Frankenstein, and we will do that go on. And then we hope to make a history-based game. It is our first one and the last one and only one, and the history is our game Pechka. We had a lot of thoughts about how to make this game, and we hope to make this game as a diaspora story. And we wanted to ask questions players, what if I had lived in that era? And this story is about not heroes, but normal people like you and me. It's about Piotr and Asha, and they are very young people in the Russian area. They're not Koreans, not Russians, and not major people in that era. Pechka is from the Choi Jae-Hyung. Choi Jae-Hyung is a very famous these days, but a few years ago, he did not famous. He was not famous in Korea also. He was a businessman and called Pechka. Pechka means in English a stove, very warm people. And he worked as a Korean resistance against Japan and based on East Russia. Especially the Korean peoples know that he supported the Harbin assassinations by An Jung-geun in secret. He helped that. This picture is from Museum of Choi Jae-Hyung in Russia. You can see the famous people in there, and Choi Jae-Hyung at the left side, and the right side An Jung-geun, in the center the Lee Wi-jong, stuff like that. We are hoping to provide the historical information and appealing to global users through touching stories. We hope to 4 kind of things as information. First one, the Korean history information and understanding historical figures like Choi Jae-Hyung, An Jung-geun, Lee Wi-jong, Alexandra Kim. Understanding the diaspora story. It's about people's story and their life in the early 20th century. And the final one was Russian history information a little bit, and the Russo-Japanese War and World War I and Bolshevik Revolution. And it's a lot of big things at that time. These are our main characters, 4 people. This game is telling about their stories. These characters are very young people, and they have their thinking, and they have to live their lives in the Russia. Around them, The real persons and real history were being there too. These people are real person, and they're making composed of the histories. Choi Jae-Hyung, An Jung-gun, Lee Wi-jong, Yeo Eun-hyung, Lee Bum-yoon, Ito Hirofumi, Radola Gaida is a Czech person, and Hong Bom-do, Alexandra Kim. She is the first Bolshevik as a woman in Korean, and Oh Min-seok, something like that. There are characters in the like this. It's very similar to real person. Gameplay is very simple. While you walk around and meet people, and the interaction icon is activated on the specific character or object, you can play and see the stories and experience all the world and characters and stories. We try to make the fields in the game as much similar to the real place as possible. The Yanchie, Vladivostok, St. Petersburg, Harbin, something like that. A lot of cities are there, and we had a lot of hard work on that. And the inside work and the inside field like this. And then a very good thing as a game, you can in the game, players can get notes about character and the historical information. The character has a lot of people in the game. Of them, 15 real characters in the history. It's a history and lots of information. I'm very sorry, it's a Korean word, but it's An Jung-gun and his information like this. And as you play the game, and you can get each of one as one. Okay, and then historical things like this, and you can get a lot of information playing the games. Let's see the short game trailer. Oh, it's very short. Okay. The Pechka is played in historical background. Chapter 1 is from 1901, and Chapter 2 from 1911, and Chapter 3 from 1917 to 1920. The Choi Jae-Hyung died, killed in the 1920 at the end of the Pechka. This game is background. It's a global and local history, Russo-Japanese War and World War I, and Bolshevik Revolution and Red-White Civil War, something like that. We did not say all about that, but a little bit about the background, historical facts. We are not academic background people. We are not professional, so we have to learn and research a lot. It was a very, very, very hard work. So we researched the 53 papers in Korean resistance to Primorsky crime in Russia, and we have to read and study a lot of papers. It was a very hard work. We don't want to do anymore and another historical games right now, but we will try to another game as a history someday. We have to get help from the professionals, and we had get the collaboration with experts in history. We have the alliance with Researchers Network MazM. It's a Korean academic group, professional group, and experts. They are very helped us review historical information in the game. We got Pechka got an awards, 2020 Korea Game Awards as a good game award, and Koka as the best game in the month, and the BIC Fest is a indie game festival global, and we got an excellence in social impact winner, and this year IGDGF we got a best narrative winner. It was a very honor and very happy to get that. Our game is a mobile game, and but this year we will go to a PC game and the console and Steam and Nintendo Switch like this year. Okay, I'm very happy to introduce my game to you, and I mm, I can say thank you. Yeah, thank you for listening. It's an end of this document. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening this.
So I think now we'll have Dr. Lee pose some questions regarding the Pechka game. So please go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Professor Wang, for hosting this event. I was telling all the guests here today before we started just how excited I am about this event today. As a fan of the game myself, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I know we have planned a long conversation, but I just did want to mention a little bit about how I found out about the game and the reasons why I've been such a huge promoter of the game, not only amongst colleagues like Professor Wang, but also when I was a grad student at UCLA and taught, I also was telling all my fellow grad students as well as the undergraduate students that they should play this game. And one of the reasons was, I found out about this game in 2010 in April, and as Hyotae mentioned in his presentation, there is a group of young scholars called the MazM Network, and they have a podcast that presents scholarly research on all sorts of topics in Korean history. And this game was introduced to the podcast. So I should say I've been a long listener of the podcast. And just to give you a flavor of the kind of research that they do, they present themselves as a group that gives history to the people as a way of empowering people through this knowledge of history. And I found that to be a very new and interesting narrative of doing public history in the field of Korean history. And I was especially interested in learning about how this game had interacted or tried to present this particular period of a very complex time in modern Korean history. It happens to be the time period that I work on in Korean literature. And so I was very excited to see a representation of that in game form. So just a little bit about that. And without further ado, I want to move on to the conversations that we've prepared. So I'm going to be asking a series of questions to our guests from MazM and the Pechka team, and we'll talk about the game. If you have any questions in the audience, feel free to share them in the Q&A link or in the chat, I believe, and either in Korean or English, and we have time reserved in the end to field those questions. Okay, so to get started, I want to get started with the first question that I had. So my understanding is that Pechka is the first history game made by the MazM team. So I wanted to ask what inspired you and the studio to make a game on history. And I know you spoke a little bit about the title, but if you could give a little bit more detail as to the meaning of the title, I think that would be a good place to start.
일단 지금부터 한국말로 좀 하겠습니다. 저희 매즘 팀은 사람들의 이야기를 다루고 싶었고 그 사람들에 대한 이야기를 가장 잘 다룰 수 있는 게 문학이고 역사라고 생각했어요. 그래서 문학 작품들을 기반으로 한 게임을 먼저 만들기 시작했고요. 그리고 문학을 만들다가 이제 역사를 도전하게 됐는데 역사는 생각보다 좀 어려운 영역이었고 공부도 많이 해야 됐고 또 역사는 오리지널로 스토리를 저희가 만들어야 되기 때문에 좀 더 난이도가 있는 작품들이었습니다. 거기까지 먼저.
네. So MazM or MazM company, we are interested in telling people's stories, people's lives. And some of the best sources to get to that are literary works or historical works. We started out with literature, as you could see from our presentation, but we moved on to history, which turned out to be way more challenging than we'd expected. It required a lot of studying, a lot of researching, a lot of collaboration, and we're not sure if we'll do one anytime soon in the future. But we had a great time, and we're happy with our product.
네. 이 패치카라는 게임에 대해서 조금 그 이름이나 이런 걸 좀 말씀을 드리면, 패치카를 처음 시작하게 됐을 때가 2019년이에요. 2019년이 이제 한국의 입장에서 보면 이제 상해 임시정부 수립 100주년이었고 3.1 운동이 100주년 되던 해였습니다. 그래서 의미 있는 해에 역사 스토리 게임을 만들어 보면 좋겠다라는 제안을 여러 곳에서 받았고, 스토리 게임을 잘 만든다 하는 얘기들을 듣고 있었던 때이기 때문에 그래서 시작을 하게 됐는데, 우연히도 굉장히 많이 알려져 있던 독립운동가가 아닌 최재형 선생님이라는 인물을 소개받았고, 그것을 모티브로 해서 저희가 평소에 잘 다루지 않았던 그 연해주라고 하는 그 러시아 지역에서 있었던 독립운동 이야기와 그 시대를 살아갔던 사람들의 이야기를 한번 해보면 좋겠다, 이렇게 해서 시작이 된 프로젝트가 패치카입니다. 그 패치카는 최재형 선생님의 닉네임이기도 하고요.
This idea to create Pechka game was birthed in 2019, which was a very meaningful year in Korea. It marked the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the provisional government in Shanghai in Korea, as well as the 100th anniversary of the March 1st movement. And it was also at the same time that we got a lot of compliments that we do a great job of making story games. And we also got a lot of suggestions from different sources to create this into a story. And of course, we were interested to look at this area that's not very well known, which is the Russia Far East. And then we also came across Jae-Hyung Choi, who we used as a motif, and who is not as well known as other independence activists in Korea. So it was a good opportunity to give him a proper spotlight and also have the area of Russia Far East more publicized to the audience.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, and speaking of Choi Jae-Hyung or Jae-Hyung Choi, I guess before moving on, I wanted to share just a few biographical notes about him. I know that, in the introduction, you showed us, what he looked like, his actual photo, and then, his character in the video game. But just to give a little bit more context, just briefly before I move on to my second question, and all of this, of course, is from the wonderful podcast episodes from MazM. If you understand Korean, I highly recommend that you go listen to these episodes. There are like 3-4 episodes on this single character. But to condense it, so Choi Jae-Hyung, he was born in 1860 in northeastern part of Korea in Hamgyongdo, and he moved to that part of Russia that is just above that Hamgyongdo. If you just keep on going north, it's that part of Russia that touches the Korean peninsula on the border. He moved there when he was about 10 years old, so in 1870 with his family. And then, he has this kind of fantastic life story where from his early teens, he gets he finds work and is taken in and supported by a wealthy Russian ship captain and his wife. So he gets educated and he finds his job. And later on in his teens, until about, right before he turns 20, he's able to make a living and establishes himself as kind of a leader figure in the Korean community that has kind of moved up to that part of Russia. And just to give you a slight context, a lot of Koreans living on the Russian-Korean border moved there during the late 19th century because it was so difficult to live within Korea itself. Choi Jae-Hyung, he comes from, very, I guess, humble background. So his father was an enslaved person, and his mother is also from a very low class in Korea, and so they had a very difficult time in terms of making a living in Korea itself. Part of the reasons why his family had immigrated to that part of Russia outside of Korea. Later on, I mean, part of the reason why he got approached by a lot of these Korean independence fighters from Korean peninsula itself in the early 20th century is because he was a leader in the Korean community in Russia at the time. And so a lot of the independence fighters from Korea itself, who could no longer stay in Korea once it was annexed by Japan, started moving outwards. And one of the outposts that they came to was this part in Russia. They contacted him as a leader of the community to ask for his support, which he provided, the most well-known case being the support of An Jung-geun, who, as many of you may know, was successfully assassinated Ito Hirobumi, and kind of celebrated as a turning point in the history of Korean independence, or the attempts to gain independence from Japanese colonial rule. From the very onset onwards. And so, Choi Jae-Hyung is also known for financially supporting a lot of the armed struggles that were based in Russia, and fighters who were traveling between Russia and China to Korea to wage armed struggle for independence until his death in 1920. Where he passed away trying to escape Japanese imprisonment for his activities supporting these Korean independence fighters. Anyway, having said this, a little bit about this main character that motivated you to make this game. I just wanted to ask a little bit from your perspective as gaming company, why did you focus on Choi Jae-Hyung, this figure, to tell the story of Japanese colonial rule over Korea? There are many other famous figures who are anti-colonial activists that are well known in Korean history. Why did you focus on Choi Jae-Hyung, and why focus on this Russian Far East rather than movements out in Shanghai? You mentioned the provisional government, or there are also very active movements in Hawaii, or in California, like Los Angeles at the turn of the 20th century as well.
이거 어떻게 제가 말씀드릴까요? 네, 제가 하겠습니다. 최재형 선생님 같은 경우는 매력적이었던 이유가 사실 잘 몰랐기 때문인 게 제일 컸어요. 그러니까 지금 아까 선생님께서도 말씀을 해주셨지만 굉장히 다양한 정보들이 막 알려지고 있던 시기이긴 했지만 학교 다니면서 배우는 역사 시간에는 많이 다루어지지 않고, 또 이렇게 안중근 의사의 하얼빈 의거 같은 경우가 잘 알려져 있음에도 그 배후에서 재정적인 지원이나 이런 굉장히 큰 역할을 해주셨던, 심지어는 동의회라는 조직을 통해서 그 전체를 리딩하셨던 분에 대해서 왜 이렇게 안 알려졌지? 하는 생각들을 많이 했었고요. 그게 아마도 이제 시대적인 환경들, 냉전 시대를 지내오면서 좀 샹하이나 또는 LA 같은 곳에서의 독립운동에 비해서 또 러시아 지역에 있었던 일들이 많이 알려지지 않았던 부분들이 이제 매력적으로 좀 다가오게 됐었고, 이런 것을 알려주는 것, 이런 것도 굉장히 중요한 일이라는 생각을 했었던 것 같습니다.
Yeah, so the reason why Jae-Hyung Choi was so attractive when we started this project was that he wasn't very well known, as we have repeatedly mentioned previously. Of course, this was the point where more information was becoming available regarding independence activities outside of Korea, and particularly this figure. However, this isn't a figure that is dealt with in Korean classrooms very much. An Jung-geun and his assassination is so popular and taught in all schools. However, the person behind the scenes who provided the financial support and was also a leader in the association of Dongi Association, it was not very well known. So when we embarked on this journey, we were like, how about we, tell the world more about this person? And of course, we had to also take into consideration that, because of the Cold War and the division of the Korean Peninsula, activities in Russia or independence activists or fighters in the socialist camp or the leftist camp weren't studied as well. And so we took this opportunity to research that more and make that available for our audience and players.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next question. I'm curious about who you had in mind as your audience, your main audience for this game, and did that sort of ideal audience affect, or how did that ideal audience affect the way you develop the storyline?
드무가 하실래요?
일단은 이 작품으로 이 작품에 보면 게임의 제목이 패치카이긴 하지만은 최재형 선생님이 주인공으로는 등장하지가 않아요. 왜냐하면 역사소 실존 인물이 게임의 주인공이 된다면 굉장히 밋밋한 스토리라인이 되거나 아니면 대체 역사를 쓸 수밖에 없을 것이다 라는 생각을 했기 때문에, 또한 이런 역사를 다룬 매체에서 저희가 단순히 영웅이 악을 무찌르는 서사를 가볍게 만들고 싶지는 않았고, 그리고 내용적으로는 그 시대를 살았던 사람들의 삶에 좀 더 초점을 맞추고 싶었어요. 그래서 이를 통해서 이 훌륭한 영웅들의 이야기를 들려드리기보다는 100년 전 그 어려운 시대에 살아낸 사람들, 특히 청년들의 이야기를 하는 것이 게임들의 큰 목표였어요. 그래서 한번 끊어갈게요.
Yeah, so of course the title of the game is Pechka, which I also forgot to mention was a nickname for Jae-Hyung Choi. He does not appear as one of the main characters in the game. And the reason is because if we use the real figure, historical figure, as a protagonist of the game, the storyline will be very flat and static, or we'll have to, rely on alternative history, so make up history, right? So we didn't want to do that. And we also didn't want to create a narrative where the hero defeats evil, like good over evil. And regarding the content of the game, we wanted to focus more on how people lived at that time, the struggles they had, the victories they've had. And also we wanted to also engage the young people to look back on what life was like 100 years ago, instead of having stories about heroes and their heroic feats.
네, 그래서 패치카라는 게임은 1차적으로는 독립운동가 최재형 선생님을 추모하고 기리기 위한 제목인 것이 맞지만, 결국 그 안에서 다루는 것은 100년 전 극동 러시아를 살았던 청년들의 삶이고, 지금 이 시대를 살아가는 청년들이 자신의 삶 속에서 겪는 다양한 고뇌나 가치관의 혼란들을 게임 속 캐릭터를 보면서 함께 생각하도록 해보고 싶었고요. 그 외에도 부차적으로 러시아 전통 난로의 온기나 이런 차가운 현실 속에서도 벌어지는 인간적인 이야기들에 대해서 조금 전해주고자 하는 의도도 있었습니다. 그래서 저희가 설정한 주인공 표트르는 자신의 정체성이 없다 혹은 잃었다라고 생각한 상태에서 이야기를 시작하고, 그래서 그러한 역사적인 사건에 휘말리면서 자신을 찾아가는 과정을 겪게 돼요. 그래서 많은 사람들이 역사에 길이 남는 인물보다는 그렇게 역사가 지나가는 동안 살아가는 사람들이기 때문에 표트르 또한 그런 인물이면 좋겠다고 생각했고, 그래서 이 스토리 게임의 주제도 이렇게 살아가는 동안의 이야기이기 때문에 그럼에도 불구하고 살아가라라는 메시지를 담고 있습니다.
It is no doubt that we borrowed the name of the game, Pechka, from Jae-Hyung Choi, and it was, of course, primarily to commemorate and honor this independence activist. But at the same time, we wanted to convey the warmth to the characters and players alike, as our title suggests, which is a traditional Russian stove, Pechka. And we also wanted to engage and speak to the young people of this era, and so they could relate to the characters in the game when it came to the various struggles, agonies, confusions they've had regarding their values, orientations, political viewpoints, and compare that to the lives of these young people 100 years ago in Russia Far East. And our main character, Pyotr, he starts out similarly in the beginning of the game with loss of identity. He doesn't know where he fits in. And throughout the game, he goes through various stages and various events, historical events, and meets very interesting people on his journey. And so our theme for this game is, you know, despite all the struggles and difficulties, keep fighting, live on, like, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to get a little bit more into talking about the characters of the games themselves. We saw a little bit of the cast of characters in the initial presentation, but could you tell us a little bit more about the main characters, introduce who they are, and then tell us, I mean, you spoke a little bit also about basing this game on real history, but can you tell us more about how you decided who the main characters were and how much of the inspiration from actual historical figures you took in shaping these characters?
이거는 캐릭터 한 명씩 답을 하겠습니다. 일단 주인공 표트르는 이전에 이제 게임이나 소설에서 좀 찾아보기 어려운 특이한 주인공인데요. 이 친구는 어떤 특정한 한 명을 모티브로 만들거나 하기보다는 그 당시에 사람이 겪을 수 있는 모든 역사적 사건을 이제 한 개인이 이제 어떻게 판단하고 이제 그걸 바라보는지에 좀 더 초점을 맞춰서 그의 정체성을 찾아가는 과정에 좀 더 이제 포커스를 맞춘 그런 주인공인데요. 그는 그 어떤 나라도 사상도 민족도 대표하지 않고 그가 소속될 수 있는 안전한 곳을 찾아서 소속감을 찾으려고 합니다. 그는 이제 자신이 누군지를 찾으려고 하면서 이제 여러 가지 역사적 사건에 휘말리고 그리고 어떤 결론을 얻어요. 그 결론은 나 자신을 사랑하고 내 주변의 사람들을 지키고 나는 그런 방향으로 살아가야겠다. 그리고 그는 이제 게임이 진행되면서 마지막에 10가지 엔딩을 가져갈 수가 있는데 그거는 이제 1920년대, 30년대 이제 디아스포라 조선인이 겪을 수 있는 것들을 과장을 살짝 섞어서 만들었습니다.
So,
여기서 한번 끊으세요.
네. We will go one by one, and we'll introduce 5 of our main characters in the game. First up is Pyotr, and he's not our usual protagonist. He's very unique. He doesn't stand for one single ideology, nation, ethnicity, country. He simply represents someone in that time period, in that place, who would have experienced various scenarios and events and would have encountered various people. And it's more of a story of Pyotr finding his identity through all these experiences and try to fit in, whether that be Russia, Korea, or anywhere, right? So as the story moves on, our Pyotr, he kind of he comes to this realization. His determination becomes firmer that, you know, he should love himself and protect his people. And this determination just gets stronger and stronger as the game progresses. At the end of the game, Pyotr has 10 potential endings. So players we don't know which one they will arrive at, but all those 10 different endings are possible experiences or situations that any diaspora in the 1920s, 1930s of Russia Far East would have and could have experienced at the time.
다른 캐릭터들 한 명도 더 소개해 주실 수 있나요? 최재형 선생님.
제가 소개를 좀 할게요.
네네.
이거는 Some people, 한국말로 해서 저기 아나스타샤라는 인물도 있고, 그다음에 차규한이라는 인물도 있고, 리자베타라는 인물도 있고, 뭐 이렇게 되는데 구체적인 내용들은 여러분 게임을 해 보시면 어떤 활동을 하는지는 다 아시겠지만, 아까 초반에 말씀드린 것처럼 당시를 살았던 젊은이들이 실존적으로 할 수 있는 선택들을 좀 생각을 해봤고요. 이거는 우리가 역사에서 배우는 이야기들에 나오는 인물들은 특정한 역할, 특정한 이념에 몰입되어서 그런 메시지를 주로 전달하는 역할을 하고 있는데 알고 보면 우리가 살아가는데 어떤 이념이나 메시지를 가지고 살아가지는 않거든요. 그래서 그런 실존적인 선택을 할 수밖에 없는 피치 못할 그런 상황에 처한 사람들의 이야기들을 담고 싶었습니다. 일단 여기까지 말씀드리고요. 네.
Yeah, so
트랜슬레이션을 해주시면. 네.
yeah, so the game Pechka has various characters, including Anastasia, Chagyuan, Lizaveta, but I hope you can discover and meet these characters yourselves when you play the game. So as we've emphasized up until this point, what we wanted to leave the audience and players with was to see the reality of the lives that young people led at the time. And people might think that, and of course, these are vessels and tools for us to, to carry a message for the players and the audience. However, we don't live our lives knowing what our calling is or what our messages are. So it's more of a story to tell that, these people were faced with these unpredictable situations where they had to make one decision or another, and which led to the next decision and next choices. So we just wanted to, that was kind of our message, if we can say that, right? To see that life isn't all planned out, and we, as well as the characters, were put in certain situations to make the shot, call the shot.
네. 그래서 퓨트르는 우리 민족의 일반적인 평범한 사람이라는 설정이고요. 우리 민족이 어떤 식의 역사적인 사건들을 겪어오는가를 그냥 민족으로 생각해서 보시면 될 것 같고, 나머지 아나스타시아나 차규환이나 리자베타도 일부 그런 요소들을 다 갖고 있는 거라고 저는 생각을 하고요. 그리고 이건 좀 어려운 얘기긴 하지만 당시를 고민해 보면 다시 왕조로 돌아갈 건지 아니면 공화국을 만들 건지 혁명을 할 건지 이런 굉장히 암울하다는 생각이 많이 들었고, 그런 데서 이제 겪는 즐거움보다는 고통이 더 많고 끊임없이 선택을 해야 하는 것들. 근데 그게 그냥 지금의 미래를 향한 선택이 아니라 현재의 생존을 위한 선택을 해야 되는 캐릭터들로 만들기 위해서 조금 고민을 많이 했었고, 그런 역할들을 다 나누어서 짊어지고 있다라고 생각하시면 될 것 같습니다. 네, 이상입니다.
Yeah, so our main protagonist, Piotr, you can see him as this ordinary guy, ordinary person representing kind of the Korean 민족, or we can loosely translate the Korean nation, and somebody who experiences these historical events that we all are familiar with, right, including the March 1st movement and etc. And but this game is dealing with numerous characters, including Piotr, of choosing whether they want to go back to the loyalty period where we had the king and the queens, or do we want to build a new republic, or do we want to fight for revolution, right? We just wanted to show that these were tumultuous, painful times where our characters had to make decisions not for the future, but for survival. So so a lot of thought went into creating characters with this in mind. And of course, this burden was kind of divided or shared among these characters in our game.
네, 그리고 저희가 만들어갔던 중요한 관점 중 하나가 사람의 이야기를 만들자라는 관점이 있었기 때문에, 그래서 최재형 캐릭터는 실존 독립운동가 최재형을 바탕으로 하였고, 하면서 동시에 그가 가진 독립운동가, 사업가, 한 가족으로서의 가장의 면을 전부 담아내려고 노력한 캐릭터입니다. 저희는 그가 어떠한 완전 무결한 영웅으로 보이기보다는 우리와 다를 바 없는 평범한 인간으로서 보이기를 원했고, 실제 삶 또한 좀 그런 엿보였어요. 그렇기 때문에 실존 인물을 캐릭터로서 구성하는 작업이 되게 재밌었습니다.
Yeah, Jae-Hyung Choi is a character who I think captures one of our biggest missions, which is to tell a people's story or a person's story. And he stands out as this as character who encompasses the independence activist, businessman, and also a head of a family or a household. And more than a hero or a great guy, we wanted to portray him as this ordinary guy who's no different from us. And that he is the one also with flaws, and problems. And his story was actually, a lot of the sources that we came across represented his life as such. And of course, reconstructing a real person's life was a great fun. We had a lot of fun making this character.
아시아 같은 경우 간단히 설명하자면 이제 19세기 말부터 20세기 초까지 계속 러시아에 있었던 혁명 세력들, 사회주의, 인민주의, 공산주의 이제 그런 등등의 세력을 상징하는데 자세히 보면 단순한 혁명 세력이 아니라 아시아는 이분법, 그러니까 적과 악을 나누고 흑과 백을 나누는 이분법을 상징하는 인물이에요. 그래서 퓨트르는 이런 사람의 옆에 있음으로써 나는 어떠한 선택을 해야 되고 이제 이 사람의 방식이 옳은가에 대해서 끊임없이 고민하게 되는 동시에 이제 아시아가 보여주는 이제 혁명 세력으로서의 행동력 같은 것들을 보고 감화되기도 하고 자기 나름대로 생각을 또 하기도 합니다. 아시아와 퓨트르가 겪는 관계 자체는 약간 러시아의 근대사랑 비슷한 느낌이 있어요. 그래서 게임에서 보면 되게 재밌을 것 같습니다.
Asia symbolizes the revolutionary forces, whether that be socialism, populism, communism, and that is what stands out at first. So you think this is a revolutionary force, but actually, if you look closely, Asia stands for the idea of dichotomy. She is a person who, is constantly challenges Piotr to think what is right or wrong. She stands for a dichotomy of like what is black and white, what is right and wrong. So it always pushes our main character Piotr to think about what is right or what is bad. Or Asia is also a person of action. So Piotr at times is also forced to act, and whether that's in one direction or another, that's for the players to find out. And just to add, the relationship between Piotr and Asia resembles the Russian modern history, which you will find fascinating as you play the game.
리자베타는 디아스포라 출신 거부라는 점에서는 최재형 선생님이 몹테이프를 했지만은 일단 성별도 그렇고 출신 등에서도 여러 가지 디테일한 차이가 있는 편이에요. 그래서 리자베타는 일단 선량한 호시민이라는 컨셉이고 동시에 자신의 민족을 돕고자 하지만 그래도 독립운동이나 혁명보다는 당장 살아남고 안전하게 삶을 이어가기를 훨씬 더 소망하는 사람이에요. 그렇지만 그러한 그 소망조차도 역사적 상황에 휘말려서 본인이나 주변인들에게 큰 영향을 주게 되고 그런 소망들이 영향을 받기도 하고 영향을 주기도 하는 거죠. 가장 소박해 보이는 것들조차도. 그래서 이러한 성향 때문인지 리자베타와의 엔딩은 그래서 모든 캐릭터들 중에서 가장 온건한 편입니다.
Lizaveta was based on a real person, Jae-Hyung Choi, as a motif. She is the rich, wealthy, affluent diaspora, but of course with differences in gender and origin. She can be described as the petite bourgeois that wants to help people, but she's mostly concerned for her safety and stability and comfort of her life. And so instead of being a participant of independence movement or revolution, she is more concerned about her comforts of life. However, even though she hopes for stability and safety and comfort, history does not just let her be, and she is involved in various incidents and situations which she is impacted by, and she impacts also. But because of her personality, Lizaveta, we could say, has the most moderate ending of all the characters.
마지막으로 박대진은 이제 조선인 중에 특히 하층민들 있잖아요. 이제 신분제 바닥에 있는 사람들, 그 사람들을 대표해서 만들어진 캐릭터고 이제 대진이의 서사를 설명하자면 목표가 없던 불황아 소녀가 조선 민족으로서 정체성을 깨달아가는 이야기를 하고 있어요. 근데 보통은 이런 캐릭터를 주인공으로 내세울 텐데 이 친구는 이제 퓨트르의 주변 인물로서 기능을 하고 이제 얘가 퓨트르를 싫어해요. 왜냐하면 퓨트르는 아무 것에도 답을 내지 못하기 때문에. 대신에 퓨트르는 박대진을 통해서 민족적인 관점에 대해서 생각을 해보고 나는 무슨 민족이 돼야 되지? 나는 민족적인 관점에 대해서 어떻게 대응해야 되지? 계속 고민을 하며 대진이한테 몇 대 맞고 이제 친구가 돼가면서 둘의 이야기가 진행이 돼 갑니다. 한마디로 박대진은 당시 혼란스러웠던 시대에 이제 나는 무엇을 해야 되지 하고 고민하다가 그럼에도 자신의 길을 찾은 모든 청년들을 대변하고 있습니다.
So lastly, Taejin Park was created on the imagination of the life of the lower class in Korea at that time. And it is a character which has a story of a wandering girl who had no goal or vision, but realizes her mission or her calling for life through her identification with the Chosun people or the Chosun Minjok. Taejin can be said to be the antithesis of all characters. And actually, Taejin doesn't like Pyotr at first. And because Pyotr is so indecisive and can't really give answers to anything. So after a few beatings, they develop their relationship. And Taejin Park, allows Pyotr to look at these historical situations and conflicts from the angle of Minjok or the nation. And it challenges to think of what kind of Minjok is he, or where does he belong, or what does it mean to belong with the Chosun people. Oh, and I want to say that Taejin Park also stands for the young people at the time who, despite the tumultuous period and all the confusion that entailed it, they moved forward and marched on.
Great. Thank you for introducing the cast of characters. I hope the audience, you could see that it's a really rich game that's, we have a protagonist, but surrounded by many characters who have fascinating sort of personal stories that add to the development of the storyline for Pechka. And in developing the storyline, at the start of our presentation, Hyo-taek, you had mentioned that the team had done a lot of historical research. Could you speak a little bit more about the kinds of research that you did? What sorts of publications did you use for your research? And besides kind of the looking at historical scholarship, did you look at any literary works, films, or other games as references for creating Pechka?
네, 우선 페치카 제작을 위해서는 보통 논문이 가장 주요한 수단이었어요. 왜냐하면 보통의 역사 매체 같은 경우는 그 역사를 다룬 다른 매체들이 있기 마련인데 이 시대에 관련해서는 그런 것이 잘 없었기 때문에 연해주 독립운동사나 당시 시대상에 대한 논문을 한 50여 편 정도 찾아보았고요. 그래서 그곳에서 얻은 정보들이 1900년대 초반에 연해주를 구성하는 데 큰 도움이 됐고 그 당시 찍힌 사진들 모은 자료집도 도움이 되었습니다. 그것들은 게임의 시각적인 요소들을 디자인하는 데 쓰였고요. 그 외에도 당대의 독립운동가나 정치인들 평전을 찾아보기도 했고요. 그 다음에 가장 기억에 남는 자료들이 두 가지가 있는데 첫 번째는 오래된 일본어로 작성되었기 때문에 그 번역업체에서 번역할 수 없다라고 거절한 일본 외무성의 기밀 문서가 있고요. 두 번째로는 체코 군단에 대한 내용을 영어로 찾을 수가 없어서 체코 군단에 대한 내용을 러시아어로 찾아서 한국인 게임 제작자들이 서치를 하는 그런 일들이 있었습니다.
To start off, we began searching for scholarly articles, and we found about 50 or so scholarly articles on the Russia Far East and the communities there. And we used these sources on the Primorsky Krai or Russia Far East in the early 1900s to reconstruct and design and plan the visual elements in the game. We also utilized an archive of cool photos taken at the time, and this was a great help, again, designing our game. Some two interesting anecdotes is that we had these Japanese archives written in Old Japanese that the company of translating company refused or didn't do the job, said they couldn't do it. And secondly, on Gondai, I believe, there weren't any sources in Korean, so they had to look for some in Russian and work from another direction. Like they had to go through multiple of translations. And similarly, the team also used biographies of independence activists and politicians at the time.
네, 그리고
먼저 하실 말씀 있나요?
네. 그리고 제가 좀 덧붙여서 말씀을 드리면 저희가 역사적인 이런 역사학 전공들이 아니기 때문에 역사적인 것들은 그 만인만색이라는 팟캐스트에 저도 애청자인데 초기부터 애청자인데 그 만인만색 에피소드의 그 229에서 232에 해당하는 그 자유시 참변에 관련된 에피소드가 있었는데 그게 정말 큰 도움을 줬고요. 그래서 아까 방금 그 송지수님께서 언급을 해주셨지만 그 논문이나 연구가 없는 이유 중에 하나가 그 역사적인 이벤트도 별로 없다라는 게 저희한테 좀 큰 어려움이었지만 어떤 그 지적 호기심을 굉장히 많이 자극하는 그런 것들이었는데, 네, 어쨌든 그 역사학자분들 도움을 좀 많이 받았고요. 거기서 저희가 좀 어떤 지도를 그릴 수가 있어서 그 다음에 논문을 찾거나 이런 것들이 좀 도움이 됐었고, 뭐 새로운 사실도 많이 알게 되고, 한편으로는 이게 지금 게임을 만드는지 공부를 하는지 잘 모르는 그런 단계들도 있기는 했었는데, 예, 하여튼 그런 도움을 받았고 그게 큰 어떤 게임을 만드는 자양분이 되지 않았나 그런 생각이 듭니다.
Yeah, so the team also relied heavily on this team of researchers, Mani and Mansek, and they also have a podcast, as our Dr. Hee-Jung told us in the beginning, and they were not historical experts, so they couldn't help but get a lot of help from this team of researchers. And it was funny because the reason why the research was hard was there wasn't a lot of research done on it. And one of the reasons is that there's not a lot of historical events recorded. And so this kind of stimulated our curiosity more. And so with the help of these researchers, of Mani Mansek and others, they were able to kind of map of like where they could find more sources, scholarly articles and materials and publications. And that's how they were able to discover new facts that they were able to utilize to build their game. Although at times they were wondering if they were making a game or studying history, but you know, at the end, the struggles paid off.
네, 그리고 영향을 받거나 도움이 된 작품들로는 일단은 작품인가 정체성 정치에 대해서 조금 더 찾아봤어요. 왜냐하면 표틀가 가장 중요하게 고민하는 것이기 때문에. 그리고 그다음에 빌러비드에서도 큰 영향을 받았습니다. 가혹한 조건에 놓인 사람들이 가진 욕망들에 대해서 생각할 기회를 얻었었고, 그 다음에 수용소 군도를 보고 나서 어쨌든 고함을 쳐야 된다라는 부분에서 3.1 운동을 의의를 연상을 하게 됐었고, 그래서 다른 나라의 작가에게서 이런 것을 확인받았다라는 느낌을 얻었어요. 그리고 일제강점기 조선을 다룬 책들을 읽으면서 그래서 세상은 단순히 선과 악으로 나눌 수 있는 것이 아니구나라고 좀 여기게 되었고, 그래서 영상물로는 드라마 트로츠키와 마지막 차르를 통해서 어떻게 이것들을 시각화를 할 것인가에 대한 실마리를 얻었습니다. 그리고 마지막으로 미드웨이라는 영화를 보면서 그 역사를 스토리로 만드는 때 어떤 관점을 가지거나 혹은 어떤 것을 취사 선택해야 되는가, 그 연출할 때 있어서 그런 것에 대해서 공부를 했었고, 아쉽게도 그 최재형 관련된 창작 콘텐츠는 적어서 그 부분은 다큐멘터리를 주로 보았습니다.
Yeah, so of course, you know, our Pyotre has a lot of problems with his identity. So of course, we had to look more deeply into the identity politics. And the work titled Beloved really challenged us to consider people's ambitions and hopes under the harshest conditions. Similarly, the Camp Archipelago was a source where we could see that writers outside of Korea could resonate with the spirit of Korean people at the time, especially during the March 1st movement. And reading works on Joseon period under Japanese colonial rule, we learn that, you know, history or the world is not black and white, and it's not divided into good and evil. It's not a clear cut. And as for the visuals, we relied a lot on the dramas titled Trotsky and the Last Tsar, and that helped us to think about how to turn history into a story, as well as a movie titled Midway. And that one particularly helped us with like the cinematic effects and, you know, what angle or what perspective we can use to turn history into story. Finally, as for Jae-Hyung Choi, we couldn't really find like creative contents regarding this figure particularly, so we mostly relied on documentaries.
그리고 조금 요거는 그 스토리텔링에서 저희가 많이 참고한 몇몇 작품 말씀드려야 될 것 같은데, so actually we refer Star Wars, Godfather, and the Game of Thrones.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the last part is super interesting, and hopefully those of you who are playing the game or who plan to play the game in the future can look for those sort of influences as you're going through the game itself. I didn't know about that part, and now I'm interested in finding those sort of intertextual connections myself as well. Yeah, so moving on about this interplay between history and sort of representing history, every piece of creative work like Pechka, this game, takes license with their subject matter. Can you tell us a couple of examples where the story, Pechka, departs from history or the historical research that you did? Why did you change, or why did you choose to make changes from the actual, you know, history that you learned and sort of researched, you know, through the scholarship that you've been, you know, telling us about? Do you have a particular, you know, reason or, you know, an idea that motivated these changes that you made?
이 게임을 만든다는 거는 약간 저희가 어떤 것을 선택하고 어떤 것을 버려야 되는지를 굉장히 명확히 해야 했어요. 왜냐하면 제한된 시간 안에 이제 저희가 보여주고자 하는 메시지를 보여줘야 되기 때문에. 그래서 당연히 이제 실제 역사를 최대한 존중하고 반영하는 선에서 작업을 하려고 했지만, 그럼에도 이제 변화되거나 아니면 조금 이제 차이점을 주거나 한 것들이 있습니다. 당장 게임을 플레이를 해보면 이제 블라디보스토크를 저희가 구현을 해놨는데, 이제 그 안에 일본 총영사관이 있잖아요. 근데 실제로 거기 잠입해서 이제 첩보 업무를 하는 것은 이제 게임에서처럼 좀 단순하게 그려지진 않았을 거고, 실제로 이제 막 편지라던가 전화라던가 블라디보스토크 달리는 트램이라던가 그런 요소들은 이제 많이 빠졌어요. 게임적 허용을 좀 감수하고서라도. 이제 그리고 조금 아쉬웠던 것들은 이제 신안촌이라고 블라디보스토크에 이주해온 이제 조선 사람들이 사는 동네, 그런 곳을 못 만들었다던가, 이제 다른 나라에서 온 이주민들, 이제 저희는 한국과 일본, 러시아에 주목을 했는데 뭐 중국이나 다른 유럽 등지에서 이제 극동아시아로 온 사람들을 못 보여준 건 조금 아쉬웠고요. 여기서 한번 끊어주세요.
Yeah, of course, Pechka, we did our best to stick to the historical facts and to represent history as it is. But of course, it is a game. So we had to make decisions on, we had to be clear on the points where the characters have to either make a decision one way or another, or, you know, throw away things or pick up certain things on the way to have the story move forward. So some of the things that might be slightly different from history or from our research is the fact that, you know, these kind of espionage and undercover work that you see in the beginning of the game in Vladivostok, particular Japanese consulate general, was not as simple as it is depicted in the game. It was much more complex and more nuanced, and we were sad we couldn't include everything into the game. Of course, there were also things like, letter writing, making phone calls, tram tracks in Vladivostok, for example, that we couldn't really implement into our game design so that it could run more smoothly. And we finally come to this place called Sinhanchon, where Koreans who came to Russia Far East or Vladivostok formed their communities and lived there. However, this was not realized. And another point that we were a little sad about was that we couldn't really include the stories of other immigrants. So we focused primarily on Korean diaspora in Russia Far East. However, we must also recognize that there were many big communities from China and other parts of Europe.
그리고 이제 이 역사적 인물에 관해서 이야기를 하자면 논문을 저희가 많이 읽고 이 시대에 진짜 우리가 알지 못했던 수많은 이제 독립운동가분들, 뭐 정치인들, 뭐 그 외에 이제 다른 뭐 첩자라던가 이런 사람들이 많았구나라는 걸 느꼈어요. 하지만 이 사람들이 모두 게임에 나오지는 못했는데 그 중에서도 이제 굉장히 지금에 들어서야 이제 다 정체가 다 드러났지만 그때는 아무도 정체를 몰랐던 첩자라던가 한국인 최초의 볼셰비키였던 이제 김 알렉산드라라던가 이제 그런 분들은 무조건 이제 넣고자 했어요. 이런 것들은 단순히 이제 역사적인 고증뿐만이 아니라 게임으로서도 스토리로서도 스토리와 게임의 양면에서 재미를 줄 수 있었기 때문이었어요. 그리고 몇 가지 저희가 이제 꼭 이건 게임에 넣어야겠다 한 것들이 있는데 우선은 이제 최재형 선생님의 마지막 최후 그것은 이제 게임에 저희가 어떤 식으로든 구현을 하려고 했고 그건 이제 게임을 플레이하다면 마지막에 이제 만나보실 수가 있습니다. 그 부분은 저희가 거의 수정을 하지 않으려고 했어요. 일단 여기서 한번 끊어주세요.
Yeah, so throughout our research, our very rigorous research, we came across so many, independence activists, independence fighters, politicians, spies, and sadly, we couldn't include all of them. But we did try to include some of the really important figures, such as Alexander Kim that we previously mentioned, who was the first female Bolshevik in Korea, as well as the last days and the death of Jae-Hyung Choi. These events and people we try to keep in the game as they were and keep to their true stories as much as we could.
All right. There's just so many fascinating elements of this game. And one of them is this sort of different endings that you can get as players throughout the game. There's no one set ending. How did you decide on, and as we spoke about before, there are key moments in the game where different characters interact with one another, and that interaction leads you to a particular ending. And so I'm curious about how you decided on when those interactions happen, right? Did you think these different choices, or how did you think about these different choices and the meaning that they would have? What kinds of messages did you imagine that the players would receive from making these choices at those moments to get to, the different endings?
일단 게임에서 있어서는 선택이란 것이 굉장히 중요한 도구이고 페치카에서는 그걸 되게 직관적으로 드러내고 있어요. 우리가 캐릭터들하고 대화를 하면서 어떤 선택지를 고르는지가 이제 퓨트르의 운명, 그러니까 엔딩과 바로 연관되어 있죠. 여기서에서 이제 선택지를 고르는 거는 다른 캐릭터의 기분을 맞춰주는 걸 넘어서 이제 퓨트르가 각 진영, 이제 뭐 좌파 진영, 이제 같은 조선 민족, 이제 뭐 소시민적인 관점, 이제 민족주의 이런 걸 어떻게 보는지를 이제 포괄해 주는 거고, 다시 말해 플레이어가 그것을 어떻게 느끼는지에 대한 관점을 약간 좀 담고 있습니다. 그리고 이제 3부에 가서는 이제 그 관점을 이상적으로 지금 현실을 이상적으로 보고 있느냐 아니면 좀 현실적으로 타협하느냐 그런 관점도 좀 섞여 있게 돼요. 일단 여기서 한번 끊어주세요.
Yeah, so choice or making a decision in the game is like a almost critical tool, and you have to interact and be in conversation with other characters to make decisions which are directly connected to the ending of the game or the ending of a particular character. And it's not merely just like getting along or liking someone, but it also that kind of that is measured the likability or favorableness of a character is also directly correlated to the player's how the player identifies with certain ideology and whether they are more prone to idealistic or realistic choices. And that kind of depends really on how the player feels through the character in the game.
네, 그리고 이제 엔딩에 대해서는 크게 5가지 방향이 있는데, 이제 아까 말씀드렸던 이제 4가지 방향과 별개로 저희가 이제 러시아의 혁명사를 보다 보면 블라디보스토크의 체코에서 온 군단이 이제 머물렀다는 기록이 있어요. 저희도 이번에 연구하면서 알게 되었는데, 근데 이 군단이 이제 엔딩에 영향을 끼치게 됩니다. 어떤 식으로 끼치는지는 이제 게임에 좀 스포일러가 되기 때문에 자세히 이야기 드릴 수는 없지만, 표트르가 이런 이제 다양한 진영과 인터랙션, 커뮤니케이션 하는 것이 이제 단순히 역사적으로 이제 내가 그냥 글렀어 하고 판단하기보다는 캐릭터들 간의 관계를 통해서 이제 스토리로 자연스럽게 익혀지게 만들게 하는 게임적 장치를 많이 넣고자 했어요. 여기서 한번 끊어주시고 체코 군단에 대해서는 잠깐 러시가 조금 더 부연 설명을 해줄 예정입니다. 영재 킴께서.
Yes, as we mentioned, Pechka has 10 different endings, but they all represent the 5 factions that we've discussed, including like the socialist camp, socialist communist camp, Russian diasporic Koreans, the bourgeois, the nationalists, and etc. And when we were looking at the Russian revolutionary history during our research, we came across a fact that troops from Czechoslovakia were at this city at this time, and we incorporated that historical fact into the ending. I won't give too much info on this, so I don't want to spoil it, so please go check it out. And Piotr's interactions and his his reflections are not clearly cut as to what he's seeing or experiencing is either right or wrong. It's just we need to take into consideration all his interactions and all his experiences and situations that he's involved with various characters. And what is he saying to this one character? What is he gaining from this character or losing something from this character because of this character? So yeah, we have to be more engaging and be interactive.
네, 여태까지 또 독립운동에 관한 여러 문헌이나 아니면 작품들을 보면 독립운동 자체가 그냥 한국인 독립운동가와 일본 제국주의 사이의 대결 정도로만 환원되고, 그래서 악과 선의 이런 대결이었었는데, 사실 이 모든 것들이 굉장히 복잡한 국제관계 속에서 이루어지고 있다라는 거잖아요. 이루어지고 있는 것이 사실이기 때문에 반드시 뭐 제1차 세계대전이라든가 아니면 뭐 볼셰비키 혁명 같은 게 꼭 언급이 돼야 된다라는 생각을 하고 있었고요. 체코 군단의 이야기 같은 경우도 제가 어릴 때 학교에서 그 청산리 전투 번역 가능하신지 모르겠지만 청산리 전투에 대한 기록을 볼 때 체코 군단한테 무기를 샀다라는 것들을 들었는데, 이게 아니 왜 가까운 중국에서 안 사고 체코에서 샀을까, 뭐 이런 고민들도 막 하고 했던 기억이 나는데, 하여튼 그런 궁금증들이 증폭이 됐는데, 이제 그런 것들을 가지고 이제 리서치를 하다 보니 이런 것들이 전부 연결이 되어 있더라, 이런 것들을 좀 알게 됐고요. 일단 여기까지 하고 그다음에 끊어서 가겠습니다. 네.
As we came across various works in literature and also scholarly works, we realized that this time period and the colonial struggle isn't merely a battle between Korea and Japan, and it's not just good versus evil. It is much more complex and nuanced, and we also have to realize that this was all happening against the backdrop of like diplomatic relations, including various states outside of Korea and Japan. And that is why we made effort to include events such as World War I and Bolshevik Revolution to our game. Regarding the troops from Czechoslovakia, I just recall when I was a student at school, I heard that during the Battle of Cheongsanli, we bought weapons from Czechoslovakia and not from China. And I was like, oh, why did we go all the way to Czechoslovakia or Czech and not China. And these were the curiosities that kind of pushed our project forward and helped us to delve into research more.
네, 그래서 그런 것들이 전부 국제 관계 속에 연결되어 있다라는 생각들을 하게 됐고요. 그래서 게임을 하시다 보면 뭐 이오시프 스탈린이나 아니면 저원 라이 같은 인물들도 몰래 등장하는데 아마 게임을 하시다 보면 그분들을 찾으실 수 있을 거라 생각이 들고요. 어쨌든 그 당시에 있었던 전 세계적인 변화들의 맥락 속에서 독립운동이라는 것과 당시에 그 한국이 일본의 식민지로 변해가는 과정을 한번 조망해 보면 어떨까 하는 좀 그런 넓은 생각들을 갖고 있어서 이런 순간들을 꼭 집어넣어야 하지 않을까라는 생각을 했고, 그 때문에 그 저희 게임이 생각보다 굉장히 방대한 이야기들을 갖고 있게 되지 않았나라는 그런 생각을 합니다. 네, 여기까지다.
And just to follow up, we need to, as we play this game, I think it's important for us to realize that the events portrayed in the game are all connected to this wider, geopolitical conditions and also diplomatic relations. And, just a, I don't know, alert for Easter eggs, you'll find figures that we all very know well, such as Lenin or Stalin or Zhou Enlai in the game. So please look out for those characters, and I think you will have a fun time interacting with them. And what I'd like to say is that we need to look at the independence struggle in Korea, as well as the changes on the Korean Peninsula under the Japanese colonial rule, in parallel to the global changes that were happening in and out of Korea throughout the world. And this has resulted in our game containing some of these grand stories and bigger ideas. So please keep that in mind.
Great. Thank you for that very thorough response. I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit more about the audience reaction to this game. Do you think the audience successfully received the message that you wanted to convey to them?
누가 얘기를 할까요?
버디가 해도 괜찮을 것 같아요.
제가 할까요? 네, 지금 페치카는 한국어, 영어, 러시아어, 중국어, 일본어 이렇게 지금 언어를 담고 있고요. 그렇게 해서 큰 성과를 올리지는 못했지만 지금 약 한 다운로드로 얘기하면 약 60만 다운로드를 넘어섰고요. 그래서 저희 어떤 당사자성을 가졌다고 해야 되나? 한국과 러시아에서 가장 큰 반응이 좋았습니다. 그래서 한국 사람들은 뭐 역사 수업 시간에 들었던 독립운동가가 나온다 뭐 이런 것들 때문에도 또 많이들 하셨고, 또 러시아인들은 이렇게 자기네 동네가 나오는 거잖아요. 실제로 이제 물론 뭐 나라가 넓으니까 살고 있는 동네 아니지만 그래도 우리 나라가 나오니까, 그래서 그런 분들도 피드백이 있었고, 특히 뭐 기억에 남는 거는 그 블라디보스토크에 실제로 사시는 분이 우리 옛날 100년 전에 사진들 많이 보고 했는데 너무 비슷하게 잘 그렸다, 우리나라 같다, 우리 동네 같다, 이런 피드백까지 주신 분들도 있어서 굉장히 재밌었을 것 같습니다. 그 외에도 아마 좀 관심사가 폭넓게 아마 있었을 것 같아요. 예를 들어 러시아 혁명이나 1차 세계대전 이런 굵직굵직한 이야기들에 관심이 있는 분들, 역사, 그러니까 게임을 좋아하시는 분들 중에도 역사나 이런 것에 관심이 많은 분들이 많아서 그런 분들도 익숙하게 느꼈을 거고, 그 외에는 저희 페치카 캐릭터들, 그러니까 페치카에 나오는 다양한 캐릭터들을 사랑해 주시는 분들이 많았어요. 그래서 다양한 운명들의 캐릭터들이 등장하는데 이게 역사에 어떤 좀 휘말려서 이게 아주 해피한 이야기들로 구성되어 있지 않거든요. 그러다 보니 마음 아파하면서 같이 보고 같이 아파하고 그 안에서의 어떤 그런 스토리텔링에 대한 경험, 그리고 어떤 주인공에 대한 그런 지지 혹은 응원의 목소리들, 그런 것들이 많이 있었습니다. 일단 여기까지 한번 끊고 갈까요?
So currently our gaming platform carries languages Korean, Russian, English, Chinese, and Japanese. Correct me if I missed something. And as of now, it has about 600,000 downloads, and it has gained most traction in Korea and Russia. So for Koreans, many were attracted because of the historical figures involved in independence fighting that they all grew up learning about. For people in Russia, many were happy to see their hometowns or Russian cities portrayed in the games. And some of the cool feedback we got was that people who actually live in Vladivostok would play the game and say, "Oh my goodness, like this looks so much alike." Oh my gosh, I have photos from 100 years ago and this looks just like it. And I think we were able to appeal to a wider audience with our wide array of interests. And so because we capture various historical events, including, as we said, World War I, Bolshevik Revolution, Russian Revolution. And so people with their interests in history and learning more about that were very much attracted to our game. I would also like to mention that many were really drawn to and made the connection with some of our Pechka characters, characters that had such various diverse fates that were involved in this whirlwind of historical events that were not always happy, and most were very tragic. And so many of our players were able to share the pain and relate to our characters. And of course, they all enjoyed this experience of storytelling and being part of that. And they all show their great support and have become very intimate with their characters.
오케이. 그리고 저희 패치카는 이제 게임의 장르로 봤을 때 이제 그런 영역이 있어요. 시리어스 게임, 한국말로는 기능성 게임 그렇게 불리는데, 그런 영역하고는 조금 다르게 접근을 했고, 저희가 그 뭐 어떤 지식에 대해서 공부를 하기 위한 게임이거나 뭔가 막 배워야 하는 게임 이렇게 접근하지 않으려고 했고요. 자연스럽게 스토리와 게임의 재미에 몰입하다 보면 자연스럽게 역사나 사상, 민족, 삶, 인간 캐릭터에 대해서 다양한 사건들을 이해하고 알고 경험하면 자연스럽게 더 궁금한 것들은 뭐 위키에서 찾아볼 수도 있는 거고, 자기가 스스로 더 알아보면서 더욱더 자신들의 경험의 세계를 넓혀갈 수 있는 그런 기회를 주고 있다고 생각하고요. 게임 내에는 그 잡학사전 영어로 뭐라고 번역되어 있나요?
풋노트라고 되어 있어요. 풋노트.
풋노트, 게임 내
아,
풋노트라는
풋노트.
기능으로 다양한 캐릭터에 대한 정보와 역사에 대한 정보들을 제공해서 이게 이런 깊이 있는 내용들이 있구나 하는 것들을 잘 전달하고 있다고 생각합니다. 참고로 2020년에 나온 게임인데 2020년 그 뉴욕에서 이제 코로나 때문에 온라인으로 열렸는데요. Games for Change라는 그런 행사가 정기적으로 있어요. 그래서 거기 저희 출품했었고 소개도 했었던 적이 있습니다.
Yeah, so I would like to speak a little more on the genre of our game. There is a established genre called serious games, which involves more like learning and gaining particular knowledge. But we wanted to kind of move away from that and kind of encourage our players to become naturally familiar and interested in particular subjects or historical figures, and to gain deeper understanding of the things that they're interested in, and also share the experience. And instead of forcing them to learn something, we actually wanted to encourage them to go out, to look up on Wikipedia more information about a certain figure or a certain event, and to widen their experience. We also have function in the game called footnotes, and that's where you can find, and I think the presentation also handled this, where you can find the historical information, like historical facts that you can collect throughout the game and learn more about, let's say, Russo-Japanese War and things like that. And we would like to also mention that in 2020, this Game Sports Change event, which is usually held in New York, it was sadly held online due to COVID-19, but we were able to participate and introduce our game there as well.
then 하나 더 덧붙이자면 so 약간 영어라네요. 저희가 뭐 러시아로 여행을 간다거나 러시아에 가서 좀 리서치를 하거나 이런 플랜이 좀 있기는 했는데 because of COVID from 2020 and then after the COVID because of Ukraine war so 이런 것들이 좀 많이 힘들어진 상황입니다. 예, 그래서 좀 더 시간이 필요하지 않을까라는 생각이 좀 들고요. 그런 부분 좀 안타깝긴 합니다.
Mm. When we first started with this idea of creating this game Pechka, we had actually planned to visit Russia to travel and do our research there. However, we were not able to do that because of COVID-19 that started 2020. And after COVID, we were not able to go because of the war in Ukraine. So it's a very unfortunate that, you know, both Russia and Ukraine are going through this. So yeah, it's just a shame that we couldn't do more research and experience it on the ground.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that discussion of the response. I want to close our conversation with two related questions on sort of the future direction of, you know, the studio, but also just about history games and Korean history games. And we'll start there first. Do you think there are demands about games on Korean history? What kinds of other games are there on Korean history that you know of? Not necessarily from your studio, but generally, what kind of games are available, and what is your sort of assessment about those games?
일단 게임 역사를 기반으로 한 게임에 대한 수요라고 하니까 뭐 그게 따로 있어서 역사 게임 내주세요 이런 것들이 매우 강하다라고 얘기하기는 좀 어려울 것 같고요. 좀 독특하고 또 그런 장르를 좋아하는 유저들은 늘 있어 왔기 때문에 꾸준히 이러한 수요는 있지 않을까라고 생각을 하고 있고, 게임이라는 시장이 과거 우리 영화나 뭐 문학이나 이런 영역을 봐도 그렇듯이 원래는 한 유명한 장르, 인기 있는 장르들 위주로 발전을 하다가 나중에 이제 수준들이, 그러니까 독자나 영화를 보는 관람객들의 수준이 높아지면서 다양화되거든요. 내가 좋아하는 장르가 생기고 좀 소수가 좋아하는 장르라 하더라도 그것을 좋아해주는 사람들이 어느 정도의 수요가 생기게 발전하게 되는데, 게임도 그 길을 가고 있다고 생각합니다. 그래서 저희가 이제 이런 역사를 기반으로 한 게임들을 저희도 만들었지만, 뭐 한국의 게임 개발사 중에는 뭐 작은 회사지만 인디게임으로 코스토츠라는 회사가 또 저희 제주 4.3 사건을 기반으로 한 게임을 낸 적이 있고요. 그런 식으로 꾸준하게 아마 뭔가가 만들어지는 사례는 있을 거고, 역사를 기반으로 한 게임들은 서양 쪽에서 많이 나와 있어요. 저기 질문 주신 분도 얘기해 주신 저 베일리언트 아츠라는 게임도 저희가 굉장히 재미있게 플레이했고 굉장히 메이저한 게임이죠. 그래서 그 게임도 많이 저희가 플레이도 했고, 1차 세계대전을 이런 식으로 게임으로 표현하는구나 하는 것들도 많이 영감도 받았고 했었습니다. 네, 여기까지 일단 끊고.
It's actually quite hard to say, you know, that the demand for historical games is this much, right? However, I do want to say, and I believe, and it has been as such, that there was always sustained interest in these genres of games. And just to make a comparison with, let's say, history of movies and cinema, you know, in the past, only the popular genres would grow and be invested in. However, as readers or viewers, you know, become more sophisticated and more knowledgeable in these areas, they begin to diversify in their tastes. And therefore, you know, smaller genres or indie genres also gain traction. And even if it's small, that interest will continue to grow or be maintained. And just as an example, an indie gaming company called Cost Dots also developed a game based on the April 3rd Jeju incident, entitled Unfolded. And as one of our participants mentioned in the chat, we also refer to games like Valiant Hearts. We must recognize that there are way more games in the West or the Western culture dealing with historical subjects. But I believe this will continue to grow and develop in Korea and have continued support.
이어서 그냥 조금 더 얘기를 하면 저희는 일단 매즘이라는 브랜드로 게임을 만들고 있고 이 매즘이라는 브랜드로 문학 작품을 기반으로 한 게임들은 꾸준히 앞으로 만들 것 같아요. 그 이유는 사람들의 삶과 다양한 세상에 대한 이야기를 우리는 하고 싶은데 그것을 가장 쉽게 보여줄 수 있는 방법이기 때문이고요. 조금 더 발전하면 저희가 이제 패치카 때 이미 해봤죠. 오리지널 스토리. 저희가 오리지널로 스토리를 쓸 수 있을 거라고 생각하는데 패치카 때 고생을 한번 했죠. 워낙 그 깊이와 넓이와 저희가 모든 걸 고민한다는 일이 얼마나 어려운 것인가를 경험을 했기 때문에 함부로 바로 뭔가를 쉽게 도전은 못하겠지만 꼭 하겠다라는 생각을 가지고 계속 저희가 발전해 갈 거고요. 그 와중에 실제 저희의 어떤 역사적인 사실들, 그게 꼭 한국 역사든 아니면 해외의 어떤 역사든 함께 엮여 있는 역사든 뭐 이런 어떤 그런 부분들도 문학이 어떤 사람이 세상을 사는 거에 대한 어떤 상상 속에서 경험을 간접적으로 해볼 수 있는 거라고 하면 역사는 사실 실제로 인간이 살았던 발자취잖아요. 그런 것들을 우리가 다시 한번 여러 각도로 조명해보고 그 시대의 어떤 영웅들의 어떤 서사보다는 그 시대를 살았던 우리 같은 평범한 사람들의 삶은 어땠을까를 다시 한번 조명하는 스토리를 만들 수 있다면 그런 이야기들을 앞으로 꾸준히 고민하고 노력하고 또 새롭게 찾아내고 하는 일들을 할 것 같고요. 역사를 다음에 뭔가 예정하고 있거나 준비하고 있거나 이런 것들이 지금 딱 정해져 있지는 않지만 뭐 이런 거 해보면 어떨까? 저런 거 해보면 어떨까?라는 얘기는 계속 만날 때마다 얘기가 나오고 있고 이제 우리 자꾸 얘기만 하고 버리지 말고 스태킹을 해두자. 스태킹을 해서 나중에 이 중에서 그때 나왔던 이거 다시 한번 꺼내서 해보면 어때? 이런 식으로 아마 작업이 이루어지지 않을까라고 생각하고 있습니다.
Yeah, so we're currently working as a brand, MazM, and we have and will continue to work tightly with literature. And because our primary focus is to represent how people live, we believe that that is most easily shown in literature. So we will continue to, collaborate with various literature in our future projects. As we learned through Pechka, creating an original story from scratch based on historical research is very challenging. So many things have to be considered, and the depth and the width of our Pechka project was really, really great. And we all struggled a lot. And so we don't have any concrete plans of making, historical games in the near future. But we always talk about our different ideas. We contemplate and have conversations with each other about it. And we agree that literature is experiencing life of someone else through imagination. It's an indirect experience. Whereas when we deal with historical subjects, we can get more close to like the real life experiences and to like how ordinary people lived at the time. So it is certainly in our future projects to do more of a historical game, and we will continue to compile and stack our ideas, and we hope one of those ideas will come to realization soon.
Great. Yeah, and I guess that wraps up the conversations that we had planned with the team. So thank you everyone from MazM for engaging with us and talking with us over 90 minutes about this game Pechka. And now I guess we'd like to open it up to the floor to see if you have any questions you would like to address to the team about the game or about anything else we touched on in the conversation. Please feel free to ask the questions. I believe there is a question in the Q&A already. Professor Wang?
Sure. It's a question from Sean Han, and he writes, I'm fascinated by the Pechka storytelling. I want the way how Team MazM narrates the conjunctions and intersections of local and global history, diaspora, ideology, and lives of ordinary people through fictional characters renders me speechless. The effect of such a powerful narrative is, I believe, a projection of profound historical perspective that is very nuanced. I'm curious to hear if the team can provide any suggestions to historians about storytelling strategies.
Very difficult.
야, 제가 대답을 좀 하면요. 이게 저희는 일단 게임을 만드는 기업이고, 그다음에 어떤 내러티브를 가지고 사람들을 끌어모아서 어떤 영향력을 만드는 거는 분명하지만 사실은 저희도 추구해야 할 목표는 분명히 있기 때문에 뭐 저희가 갖고 있는 역사학에 대한 인식이나 이런 것들은 뭐 그렇게 막 중요하다라는 생각은 들진 않습니다. 하지만 이렇게 제가 이런 말씀 드린 이유는 역사학자들이 하셔야 되는 더 중요한 역할들이 있으신 거고, 저희는 저희의 이런 역할들이 있는데, 저희가 역사학자들한테 뭔가를 바란다는 거는 좀 두려운 이야기인 것 같고, 근데 좋은 역사들을 많이 발굴해 주셨으면 좋겠다라는 생각도 갖고 있고, 그 다음에 어떤 팩트에 대한 다양한 시선을 제공해 주시는 것도 굉장히 좀 저희한테 큰 도움이 되지 않을까라는 생각이 들고요. 뭐 아까 언급해드린 대로 요새도 열심히 듣고 있는 만인만색 같은 젊은 역사학자분들이 더 활약을 좀 해주셔서 저희한테 많은 이런 소재들을 제공해 주시는 게 좋지 않을까라는 그런 생각을 합니다. 근데 감히 역사학자들에게 뭐를 바란다라는 걸 이야기할 입장은 아니다라는 생각이 좀 들긴 합니다. 저는. 네, 이상입니다.
I guess I would like to start off by saying that we are a game company, and we deal with certain narratives, and we do try to have some influence among our audience and our players and our fans. But it gives me much fear to give any particular advice to historians. However, what we can hope for, and we kind of kindly request, is to do more various research, right, and to conduct numerous research on the same topic from different perspectives. And I think that kind of gets to your nuanced aspect of the question. And on top of that, there are great scholars out there who try to reach the audience through various platforms, such as the podcast that we mentioned, 만인만색. And those are just great avenues to access these fascinating subjects and topics that we as a gaming company could use to further our projects.
저도 한마디 하고 싶네요. 듣고 나니까 이런 역사라는 것이 이렇게 존재하는데, 이 존재하는 것이 객관적으로 뭔가가 이렇게 잘 나와 있는 내용을 파악하기가 좀 어렵잖아요. 근데 그러다 보니 전문성이라는 영역과 대중화라는 영역의 갭이 굉장히 넓은 편이라고 생각해요. 근데 이걸 대중화하면 사람들이 굉장히 좋아는 하는데, 문제는 전문성이라는 걸 완전히 놓쳐버리고 마음대로 자의적인 어떤 해석 내지는 이런 것들로 가게 되면 또 위험하게 될 수도 있고, 이런 부분들을 잘 엮어서 보면 사실 이번에 만인만색과 저희가 함께 패치카를 만들면서 협업했던 사례같이 이렇게 대중화할 수 있는 어떤 연결고리로서의 어떤 역사가 약간 공공성, 공공재로서의 역사, 공공역사라고도 부를 수 있다고 배웠는데, 그런 역사들을 어떤 브리징 역할을 할 수 있는 컨텐츠의 제작, 이런 부분들은 서로 협업이 많이 일어나면 좋겠다는 생각이 듭니다.
So I think we always have to keep in mind that field of history, a discipline of history, exists as it is, and it can be easily divided into like this professional sphere and like this mainstream sphere. And it is so important to maintain that professional aspects in mind, so that the stories don't just go out of control, and there always needs to be this balance and cooperation between those both fields. And as we realize through our cooperation with 만인만색, it's always important to serve as this bridge that connects these two fields of professionalism and also mainstream history or mainstream culture. And we hope that we can always, collaborate and yes, be the bridge between those two.
Okay, I don't know if there are other questions from the audience at the moment, but maybe I can ask a very somewhat silly question. If a historian doing their research wants their subject matter to be turned into a game, how should they start the process?
어떻게 답을 드려야
어떻게
돼요?
답해요, 지금? 이거 제가 조금 이야기를 해봐도
네.
될까요? 네.
네.
물론 이제 게임 만들기 위해서는 어떤 역사를 또 어떤 사건을 어떤 인물로 소재를 할지를 먼저 정해야겠죠. 저희 같은 경우는 이제 처음에는 최재형 선생님 한 분으로 출발을 했지만 이제 그분을 둘러싸고 있는 이제 러시아 그리고 조선 그리고 그것과 관련된 세계사들 그게 굉장히 많았기 때문에 그거를 참조를 했어요. 그리고 이제 문제는 이제 이것들을 어떻게 게임에 녹여내는가인데 이 부분에서 이제 게임 제작자들의 선택이 되게 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 게임은 이제 다른 매체도 마찬가지지만 게임은 이제 모든 것을 담을 수가 없어요. 그래서 우리가 보여주고 하는 것이 무엇인지를 확실히 정해서 거기에 조금 더 이제 집중을 하면서도 이제 세부적인 디테일들, 그러니까 이제 몇 년도라던가 이제 이 사건에서 어떤 뭐 누가 개입됐다고 하는 것들을 이제 좀 힘을 빼서 잘 보여주는 게 좀 중요하다고 생각을 했어요. 패치카를 만들면서 많이 좀 힘들었거든요. 네, 한번 끊어주세요.
Yeah, so I think it's the first step would be to identify a particular person or incident or event before moving forward. If we take Pechka as an example, we started off with Choi Jae-Hyung, and he was our central figure. But as we researched and looked into it more, we realized Russian history, Joseon history, like global histories were all intricately woven with this figure. And and it's a lot of hard work to incorporate all of this into this game. And of course, it's impossible to include all our information, all our findings into a game. But I think the most difficult part for us was that to include these certain details into the games, such as dates or people involved in certain incidents or evidence, but not too imposing, but just to have that in the background. So that was very hard, and that's very important too.
So we actually have a question from the audience. So I will, this is from Sujin Hyun. Many thanks for your fabulous presentation. I would like to ask if there are some difficulties in re-narrating real history into original game stories. For example, aren't there any problems to deal with for certain historical figures like Yoon Hyung, who was in the left camp? Or how did you want to deal with figures who were involved in, for example, the pro-Japanese side?
러시가
이건
이게
제가 좀 답을 해야 될 것 같은데, 뭐, 이런 여러 가지 리스크들이 좀 있었죠. 굉장히 힘들었고, 특히나 뭐, 재밌는 이야기지만, 후손이 얼마나 많느냐도 저희가 좀 많이 고려를 했고요. 그래서 뭐 이렇게 누가 쳐들어오지 않을까, 뭐 이런 생각도 좀 하고 그랬는데, 뭐 이런 거 하다 보면 너무나 힘들어서, 사실은 좀 무시하고 하려고 했었고요. 저희끼리 어떤 정한 캐릭터들을 그냥 그대로 사용하자. 그리고, 뭐, 저기, CEO는 다른 입장이겠지만 저는 회사에서 일하는 입장이라서 어차피 욕은 먹을 거니까 담대하게 재밌는 스토리를 만들어 가자가 굉장히 중요한 하나의 모토였고요. 그리고 그런 것들에 대해서 그렇게 신경 쓰진 않았어요. 그러니까 신경을 굉장히 많이 썼기 때문에 오히려 겉으로는 신경 쓰지 않는 것처럼 보이는 것 같고, 그리고 이제 구체적인 팩트들에 기반을 해서 좀 이야기를 하려고 했고, 그 다음에 사실 뭐 이렇게 좀 비겁하긴 하지만, 뭐 누가 뭐라 그러면 이렇게 논문을 보여주면서 이거 보면 읽어보고 오시라고 뭐 이런 식으로 얘기를 하려고 했었고, 뭐 안타까운 거는 뭐 이동희 선생 같은 경우는 저희가 언급을 못했고 저희가 좀 하려고 했는데 여러 주변에서 하지 말라는 얘기들을 많이 들어서 그런 경우가 있습니다. 근데 굉장히 재미는 있었지만 이제 이 스토리 자체가 너무 우울하기 때문에 이분들을 그러니까 굉장히 먼치킨 캐릭터로 만들어서 그 일본 제국주의와 하늘을 날아다니면서 싸우게 해드리고 싶었지만 그거보다는 그냥 우리 처음에 생각한 대로 구체적인 좀 더 객관적으로 서술해보자라는 것들에 좀 초점을 두느라 조금 후반부에는 좀 괜찮았습니다. 초반부에는 좀 그 어떤 중심을 못 잡아서 힘들었는데 그런 부분은 힘들었지만 재밌지 않았나라는 그런 생각을 합니다. 네.
Uh, yes, we did consider many risks when we ventured into this project. We did consider the descendants who are alive of these figures. They were worried, if their company or their office would be, visited or attacked while they were doing this project. However, we were determined in what we wanted to do, and we stuck with our figures and characters. And to be frank, a CEO might not agree, but my mindset was that we'll get a negative response anyway. Just let's give our 100% regardless. It's kind of like their motto of the game, right? To move on. And some comfort came from the fact that their research was so thorough and so rigorous. So and I love this as a historian, but if anybody had a problem, we were able to give them direct them to a source. This scholar said this about this, so this is why we did this, made this decision in a game. And we were saddened that we couldn't include Idongi into our project. And our game overall is very sad and very depressing. And instead of dealing with some of these figures that are more well known and portraying them as these heroes that are fighting heroically against the Japanese imperialism, our focus were more on like their personal lives and had more personal touches in telling those stories.
다행히도 이제 역사 관련해서 이제 태클이 오거나 막 후손들에게서 고소를 당하거나 하는 일은 없었습니다. 여담이지만.
As an anecdote and as a some sort of a kind of relief, we didn't get any like major tackles or obstacles because of some historical issues, and we have not been contacted or sued by any of the descendants.
그다음에
우리
또 한 가지
60만이라 그럴 수도 있어.
유명해지면 안 되는 거지.
네, 저희가
또 한
60만
가지
다운로드여서 그럴 수 있다고요.
It could be because we have 60,000 downloads.
네, 또 한 가지 이렇게 저희 생각했던 것 중에 하나가 이 일본 제국주의에 대한 어떤 경계나 증오는 분명히 있지만 일본인에 대한 증오나 이런 것들은 구별해서 사용하려고 노력을 했고요. 그래서 뭐 게임을 해보시면 일본인 등장인물들도 있고 굉장히 인간적인 그냥 일상생활을 살아가는 사람들의 이야기들을 좀 부각시키려고 했다는 점도 있어서 실은 저희 입장이 좀 단단했다라는 생각이 들고 그 단단함을 주신 것들이 또 저기 만인만색 같은 선생님들께서는 도움을 주셨기 때문에 그게 좀 작업이 쉽게 이루어지지 않았을까 쉽진 않았지만 이루어지지 않았을까라는 생각을 하게 됩니다. 네.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out that when it came to dealing with Japanese imperialism, we didn't portray them in a negative light. I mean, of course, there are problems with that. However, when it came to portraying Japanese people, we tried to portray them as humanly as possible, just like the rest of us, ordinary people living their lives during this period. And of course, we were able to do that with the help of scholars such as those in Mani Mansek, and being able to have that kind of historical grounding allowed us to tell various stories, not just of heroes, but of ordinary people, whether they were Japanese or Korean.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, either from the audience or maybe among the panelists? Let me see. So another sort of question that I think everybody's already mentioned this a little bit is that regarding historical research and the sources that are used it sounds like actually historical research, good historical research from diverse perspectives and that's rigorous and well sourced is actually very useful, right? And I think right now in the United States and also in Korea, among the historical profession, there's this anxiety, right, about what is the usefulness of history. It's usually outside of the academy, it's very hard to apply history to a particular profession. And I think it's hearing actually from your experience, I am actually quite inspired to see that the values that historians have regarding research, rigor, it's different perspectives, being taking a humanistic, human-centered perspective on the past. These things are actually contribute to something wider, right? And I think it's really important for people to realize this, right? That it's not just something that happens in the academy. So I guess that was more of a comment, a reaction on my end, and I think I share with everybody this sense, right, of the potential of history, and yeah. So with that, I don't know if we need to continue. I mean, we've been here for about 2 hours already. I'm sure everybody is tired, and our audience who has stayed here the whole time is as well. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and for participating and for taking the time to talk with us about this great project. And I hope MazM will return to historical narratives. I think, you've shown us how it should be done, and I think there's a lot out there. And I suppose maybe there are always historians out there who probably would like to help in some way with research and whatnot. And I think it's something that would be really great, right, if we had more of this, more projects like this in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
Also, thank you, Dr. Lee and Yerim for helping facilitate this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.